Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. I am McKenna Jordan. I'm the owner of Murder by the Book in Houston, Texas. If you are a first-time virtual event watcher, we're glad to have you. We have been doing quite a few of these. So if you're interested in seeing what's coming up and you're watching on Facebook, you can look at our events tab. We have been doing a virtual event almost every day in February. So there's lots of great things coming up. Or you can visit us on murderbooks.com. We have an event calendar there as well. Some things of note, this evening at 7 o'clock, we'll be back with four cozy authors from Texas, so that should be fun, a Texas cozy panel. We also have just launched a subscription box plan, which those of you who watch these have heard me talk on and on about, but you can find information about it at murderbythebox.com. We have three plans: Best of the Month, Cozy Corner, and Crime Fiction Legends, and so far we've just done the one box for each. And people are loving it. So if that's something of interest to you or you need a last-minute Valentine's Day gift, murderbythebox.com. As you're watching, if you're watching on YouTube and you have any questions, put them in the live chat. I will get to them later, 30 or 40 minutes into the conversation, but don't be shy. There's no such thing as a dumb question, and your questions can be for either Michael, Sandra, or both. If you're watching on Facebook, same thing, just pop them in the comments. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and introduce our guests today. I'm very excited to be joined by Michael Koryta and Sandra Brown. I'm going to start with Michael Koryta. Let me bring him on here. Hello.
Hello, McKenna.
I'm so sad we're not in person.
Know it.
Okay. Well, for those of you not familiar with Michael Koryta, here is his introduction. Michael Koryta is the New York Times bestselling author of 12 novels. His previous novels were New York Times notable books, national bestsellers, and have been nominated for numerous awards, including having won the LA Times Book Prize. Koryta is a former private investigator and newspaper reporter. He lives in Bloomington, Indiana, and Camden, Maine, and Never Far Away is his latest book, which is out Tuesday, and we certainly, as always, have copies, and they're available for pre-order. I'm going to, in just a minute, get the link for more information or to order books popped into the comments. So you're doing well?
I'm doing well. Thank you for doing this.
Absolutely, my pleasure. I'm looking forward to this.
I
All right,
am a little bit with the loss of Screech Powers, but I'm persevering.
You know, I almost was trying to figure out a video so I could play the, Saved by the Bell music and the intro for you today, but we've done that in store before, so that gag has been done. All right. So we're also joined by Sandra Brown. Hello.
Hello, McKenna. Hello, Michael.
Hello.
All right. So same thing. If you're not familiar with Sandra Brown, let me get you her introduction. She is the author of 72 New York Times bestsellers. There are over 80 million copies of her books in print worldwide, and her work has been translated into 34 languages. She lives in Texas, although I'm going to get to it in a second. I think you're not joining us from Texas today. And her latest book is Thickest, Thieves, which is actually going to be out in paperback next month. It's available in hardcover right now. So you're doing well?
I'm doing well. Thank you. Thank you for inviting me. This is an honor.
Oh, it's an absolute pleasure. And I know that you are a big fan of Michael Koryta as well. I think I've seen your blurbs on his books in the past. So this should be a fun conversation. Now, you were saying as we warmed up behind the scenes, you're in the Low Country today?
I am. I'm in South Carolina, in Hilton Head. I'm here on my annual writing marathon. It's when my deadline is looming, I come here and kind of just shut off my life. And this is my last public appearance, my last time to talk to anybody except my family for about the next 6 weeks. So this is kind of
Thank you for letting me be.
But I've got it's crunch time. You know what that's like, Michael, when you're doing those last few pages in your draft, and they have to count. So I come down here and just try and do nothing except write.
I don't want to jinx you, but I think after 80 million worldwide sales, you're going to be just fine. You'll make that deadline.
But
I think you'll figure it out.
You start every day like it's the first time you've ever done it. At least I do. I start every morning with like, I don't know how to do this anymore. So
The
it's
front
always
page is always a little intimidating.
yeah, always.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to get to writing process in a little bit, and I definitely want you guys to chat all you want. But I would like to start with this. A lot of times people forget this tiny aspect. I want you to give us an elevator pitch or a brief description of your most recent book. Michael, it doesn't have to be elevator pitch. I just need people who are tuning into these. We have so many people who watch these who are not familiar with the authors because they don't have to make a trip to the store. Like, they can just watch from home on a Saturday afternoon and be introduced to someone new. So I want you to tell people kind of the books you write and about your most recent book. And why don't we actually do ladies first here? Sandra, why don't you tell us about Thickest, Thieves?
Okay. This started without any plot whatsoever. I had no idea what this book was going to turn out to be. It was one of those blessings that don't come along very often, where I was just thrust into a scene. And I heard somebody say the surefire way to get caught is to talk about it. And so I thought, who said that? And I started looking around. And since I was the only one in the room, I started writing down what the characters said and what they did and what they were smelling and where they were and how it felt. And 7 pages later, I had a prologue. And it ended with, by daybreak, their plan had been shot to hell. One was in the hospital, one was in jail, one was in the morgue, and one had gotten away with it. And what he'd gotten away with was the backpack of money that they had stolen. And so from there, I sent it to my editor and said, here's a prologue. Let me know what you think about it. And he called back and he said, gosh, I love it. What happens? I said, I have no idea. But that's where I started with the book. And I write basically romantic suspense. Sometimes they're more in the thriller vein. Sometimes they're more in the mystery vein. But I always like to build in a surprise. That's kind of a trademark of Sandra Brown, is building in a surprise at the end. It's that one thing I know that the audience doesn't. And so that's more or less. So from that prologue, I wrote a story about the theme of it really is that you can't outrun the things that you do. You have to, there is a comeuppance at some point, and it can be, very favorable. You can learn something from it, or you can just keep making the same mistakes again. So that's kind of the theme of it.
Excellent. Well, that's a pretty good hook that she just gave us, Koryta. It's up to you to beat it.
Thanks for letting me follow that. It's actually in a similar fashion. I start without plot. The difference is I also finish without plot. So I like your idea of working one in there at some point. Never Far Away is the story of a woman who feels like she's already made the greatest sacrifice you could ever go through in life, which is to leave her family, to abandon her own children and her husband. And it opens, she's faking or orchestrating her own death to try to protect her family. And she's moved from Florida to the Allagash wilderness in Maine, and she lives off the grid as a wilderness guide. And in her mind, this is the last time, she will never know her infant children who she left. And the book opens with a tragedy that kills her husband. And after 10 years, circumstances force her to kind of like come back into her children's lives, but they don't know who she is. And she does. So what Sandra is talking about, the one thing you like to hold back from the audience, there's also the one thing you like to give them to sort of put them ahead of some of the characters. And I was really interested in the idea of the emotional burden of, and I guess challenge. You have this chance to reconnect with your children, and it's a sacred opportunity, but then you don't want to cause them further harm by telling them that they have been living this lie for 10 years. So it wasn't as good as hers, but it's, I think, better than my usual pitch. Is that right?
I'll give you that. It was good. You did a good job, and the book's excellent, and so it's fine. We trust you. All right.
You can't start reading that book without finishing that book. It was, I mean, Michael really thrust the reader into oh my God. And that's a nice way of putting it, because I was saying other things. I was like, oh my God. But you wrote it beautifully from the female point of view, by the way, because I have two children. My daughter's the older, my son's the younger, just like in the book. And so it was like, how in the world would you deal with that? Not only just a human being, but from a very maternal standpoint, you nailed it. I mean, you truly did.
Wow,
and that's not to say anything about the suspense and the mystery and the other characters, which I can't wait to talk to you about. But it is a gripping first few chapters. Yeah.
Now that means more than enough. Thank you.
Kudos to you.
I too was going to mention the fact that it's remarkable how well he embodied that voice. And is that just kind of personal experience? Did you draw from inspirations of women in your life, or you just were able to put yourself in that role? Where did that character come from?
It's a really good question. I never have thought too much at the start of a book about whether I'm writing from a woman's perspective or a man's. It's just, I'm aware of the inciting incident. And then because I don't outline, there's so much more that I don't understand than what I do understand, that I feel like I'm kind of walking in step with the character. And sure, I mean, I have to be drawing from the women in my life, and I'm surrounded by a lot of, really smart, tough women who don't take any of my crap. So that makes it pretty easy to draw from on a daily basis. But I try not to, in the early stages, I try not to overthink those elements, because I think that could become intimidating or daunting to think. And this is a question that we see a lot now in publishing, particularly in YA, that kind of makes me nervous. It's the question of like, well, if you haven't had that experience, are you equipped to write in that? And to me, that's the journey of fiction.
Absolutely.
I haven't raised two children, let alone have I, abandoned them and faked my death in this elaborate scenario. But the ability to try to make that journey and hopefully land it as close as I can, that's the entire idea of literature to me.
That's an interesting point, if I may jump in, McKenna, because, advice given by teachers and everything is like, write what you know. Well, what I know is pretty boring.
Yeah.
I know my next door neighbor, but I don't want to write a book about him unless, they find his wife in the freezer or something, then he's interesting. But I've always wanted to write about things that I wanted to know, and characters that, gee, I wish I knew somebody like that, So I think what you said about if you try and overthink it and think, how can I do this? How can I do this? Because, and people have asked me, maybe you've gotten this question before, you write so much from the male point of view. How do you know how a man thinks?
Right. And
I think, well, it really makes you wonder about Anne Rice, because she writes from a vampire's point of view,
Right.
And how do you write from a ghost point of view, a dog's point of view? So really, I think it is a challenge of fiction writing not to write about the things but to project and invent. And to me, as a fiction writer, as you said, that's one of the best challenges and one of the most fun things. I don't want to write about the people that are like me. I want to write about people who are braver, more courageous, or more crazy, or whatever they are. Yeah,
absolutely.
I will add as someone who's done a few of these interviews. I don't know. There's a bad echo, right?
Oh, sorry. That might have been me. I had to get a Kleenex.
Okay, I think we're good now. As someone who's done several of these interviews now, it's interesting to me, the authors, when they talk about writing from a different gender perspective or something like that, I feel like the ones who do it most successfully start out like you did, Michael, which is, I have a character in mind, I have a plot in mind, and you don't necessarily think, I want to write a story about a woman. You want to write a story about a person. And it's fascinating to me how the authors who treat their character as a person, whether you would label them a strong female or something like that, they just write that person. And if it happens to be a woman, it happens to be a woman. Those are the authors who succeed most with it. It's not the people who decide that they arbitrarily want to write a book about a woman and then they feel like they need to supersede real life things with what would a woman do. So it's interesting because obviously you succeed extremely well, and Sandra, you clearly have exceeded well in many books written about men. I think it's just that idea to write a good story about a person and what that person's going through. So anyway, my 2 cents. Back to the characters about your books, Koryta. So the Blackwell family first appears in Those Who Wish Me Dead, and they keep coming back. Did you know you were going to keep having them come back?
No. You're supposed to be able to write a, recurring hero, and for some reason I'm struggling with that. But being drawn back to the villain is apparently quite natural. I don't want to overthink that. It seems like it might lead to some dark places. But I thought the Blackwells were gone. It's a bit of a spoiler, but in Those Who Wish Me Dead, you would really be surprised if you saw Blackwell again. And I missed it. So, they had a way of talking to one another that just, I would kind of fall into a trance in that exchange. I always found them funny and very terrifying. And I was thinking about that book. I was working on the screenplay for Those Who Wish Me Dead, which sort of put me back into that world. And as I got back into that idea, I'm thinking about the characters a little bit deeper. It occurred to me that family is the only value they hold sacred. They're absolutely empty when it comes to anything except family. And when I was considering that, I thought, well, if family matters that much, why on earth would they exist without children, in this vacuum? And so that was what sort of brought Dax Blackwell, who is Dax's son, in my mind. But I wasn't sure who would work. So in If She Wakes, that was the first time I put him on the page, and I gave him, it's one of the only times I've done this. I broke away from the document, the book in progress, and I just wrote a standalone chapter in his point of view. And I thought by the end of 6 or 7 pages, I will know if he works or if it's just, that I have this long character I can't use. And by the end of those 6 pages, I thought he was pretty well.
Yeah. He was an amazing character, and he's one of those characters that you're almost cheering for the bad guy, because he's like the jackal, in Day of the Jackal. It's like you cannot wait, or the character in Baker in Eye of the Needle. It's like, in a perverse way, you kind of want to see them succeed. It's like, go Bonnie, go Clyde, and so it to write a character like that takes enormous talent, but to make him an empathetic character too, not necessarily sympathetic, but an empathetic character where you're fascinated by things that he says and things that he does, and the wheels in his mind, the way they turn, was fascinating, truly.
Thank you. Yeah, it struck me that the Leah Trenton, or Nina, depending on which part of her identity we're talking about, her story was so layered with ideas of family legacy, and the legacy she was leaving for her children under these 2 different identities, that it seemed very natural Dax would have a more existential sort of role in this book, thinking about his own legacy. And if I can get you to the point where you're sort of rooting for him, then that's... Yeah,
absolutely. And as I say, it's almost in a perverse way, but it's, we are, as human beings, that we're always fascinated with the bad guys. It's kind of like, what would it be like to live in that person's skin for a little while and not care what people thought about you, or just to be almost amoral, and I guess because I had to grow up so disgustingly good, such a goody two shoes. I really enjoy writing the villains, So
Your parents never let you kill anyone?
never once. I got grounded for staying out 15 minutes after curfew, So.
See, we're all pushing back against family legacy in one way or another. Then, we're honoring it.
I will pop in really quickly. Sally from the bookstore, obviously, Koryta, you know Sally. She just commented about the shout out to Scott Carson also, which those of you who don't know, Michael Koryta writes under the name Scott Carson, more supernatural thrillers. He just had one out, and they are also highly recommended. So yeah, did you have fun with that?
She's got a sharp eye. Yeah, I couldn't. It was literally one of those moments. And Sandra, I don't know if you have these where it couldn't be a more minor character, and I cannot come up with a name. And so I'm thinking, okay, what is a name that I know? And then it's like, oh, this will be kind of fun. The self-referential name check.
And they couldn't understand the name at first. It was like it stuttered, or you had to misspell it.
You read with a sharp eye. I'm impressed.
All right, so both of you, Koryta, you have written some series, but recently you've been writing these standalone novels where you might have characters have appearances, but essentially standalone novels. And Sandra, you've made your career on standalone novels by and large, a few pairings here and there. Why does that appeal to you more than the long-standing series? And let's start with you, Sandra.
Honest and truthfully, writing a series never once occurred to me. It never even occurred to me. It wasn't like I made a conscious decision about it until years later. And it was actually in an interview. Someone was interviewing for, I think it was a piece in People magazine, and they said, so many writers write about, a detective or a, forensic, pathologist or something, forensic pathologist, something, lawyer, whatever. And you write a different character every time. And I was like, aren't I supposed to? It's like, was that the rule I broke? I didn't know. But it never had occurred to me, because when I put a story to rest, generally speaking, you've cited, a few times I have taken a secondary character and given them their own book. But largely, I start fresh every time. And I think it goes back to what we were talking about earlier. You want to write about somebody who interests you, somebody that just walks out of your subconscious and says, look at me, I'm interesting for one reason or another. So my career would have been easier, probably larger. I would have had more TV and movie offers. Because it's easier to build, I think, on a character that the reader, is familiar with. But it just never did interest me to do that. And I've been asked, would you ever think of starting a series with this character? I got, no, I've got somebody else over here I want to write about. So until something changes drastically, I'll probably continue with the standalones.
Well, and as you said, you've taken peripheral characters and made them the star in the past. And so
yes,
I guess
I have done that a few times. Yeah, it was a character that just, moved in with me, and I wasn't through with me yet. I always feel like I never create anything. I think they're already there. I know this sounds schizophrenic, but I think they're already there, and they come to me and say, write my story. Or find my story. So I've done that a couple of times.
How about you?
I couldn't agree more with really everything that you just said. Kind of going in reverse order, the idea that you're not creating, you're almost listening, and you're taking, the character in the story, and they announce themselves to you, and then when it's going really well, you're trying to keep up.
Yeah.
That's my experience. And then with regard to the career and the professional side, I think it is, I've certainly been told by enough people that it is easier to build a sustained following with a series character. But I think you need to also just be honest enough with yourself and the reader to say, I'm trying to do my best work each time out. And the readers are so much smarter than we are. I feel like if you're phoning in a book just to try to build this audience, everyone is going to smell that out pretty quickly. And I did not. I had the good fortune of starting pretty young in this business, and I knew very early on that I was already growing bored with Lincoln Perry, the character that I'd written about in 3 books. And I also knew that this was the only thing I wanted to do, for my life's work. I wanted to be a writer. I did not want to write Lincoln Perry for 50 years.
Yeah.
I couldn't imagine that. So I did make a conscious decision to say, okay, let's try to push in a different direction. And there are times when I miss Lincoln, but I think it's very telling that I've never gone back. I mean, if he really wants to kick the door down, he knows where to find me.
So I would normally wait for questions until the end, but since we're talking about that, Kim was wondering, is there any chance he'll return?
Perfect. Yeah, there's a chance, but he's had a long time now without putting in he hasn't raised his hand.
So are the Blackwells still raising their hands? Are they still in your head?
Yeah, Dax is definitely, I like the way he exited stage left at the end of this book.
Mm-hmm.
I have no idea what will form of that, but I feel like there's potential there. And there's just, as Sandra was saying, there's a secondary character who, as the book went on, became more and more intriguing to me. And I don't know that much about him. So I could see something, coming out of that. But
And in terms of leaving a character, I find myself missing some characters. Like the longest series I ever did was the Texas trilogy, and it was 3 members of the same family. And the books really weren't sequential. You could read, well, they were, but I mean, you could pick up one and read it, and it would be, a read unto itself. But I find myself missing them. And I have, many fans who have said, please write about the Tylers again, and sometimes, here comes the schizophrenia again, but Michael, do you ever wonder what your characters are doing while you're not there?
oh, absolutely. I'm particularly curious about
I can't wait to join them in progress again. It's like, what are they up to? What are they doing while my back is turned? So I think these people should become so real to the author that you would know them on the street if you were to run into them and, in a crowd. And so I get to where I miss a certain character, and I'll go and pick a book up and say, I want to read about her for just a few chapters, or I want to read about him, because so I can understand in some regard how our colleagues who do write a series, that person would really become, like your imaginary playmate.
Oh, absolutely. One of the strangest moments I could point to of that sort of schizophrenic response you're talking about is I had the question just out of nowhere one day. LeBron James has left Cleveland, come back to Cleveland, and left again since I last wrote Lincoln Perry. And I wonder how Lincoln feels about that. And that's an indication of, okay, wow, you're thinking about him like he's a real person that, I wanted him to weigh in on LeBron in Cleveland, which, probably
get his opinion on that.
That's funny. So I generally ask authors if there's ever a moment in your writing where your character takes the wheel away from where you think they're going. But it sounds like the characters have the wheel all the time for y'all.
Mm-hmm.
If it's going well, I have learned now when I'm beginning to engineer a situation, even if the engineering of it seems really promising, then I've probably already lost it, a little bit farther back. When it's going well, I'm going to be surprised.
How about you, Sandra?
I feel the same way. Oh, I feel the same way. Some of the best plot twists, people say, how in the world I didn't see that coming, well, it shocked the hell out of me too. I didn't see it coming until it happened. And then I would be like, I'm so good. But it would be entirely just all of a sudden there, and I wouldn't see that twist coming. When I'm thinking about the storyline I want to pursue, I will build in, this goes back to our friend Vogler, Michael, building in certain peaks that are going to be, in the storytelling, most elementary aspects of storytelling. There have to be some twists, there have to be some reversals, some built-in peaks where everything flips. So I kind of pick those. I kind of know what those, tent poles are going to be. But then half the time, the best of it just occurs. And I didn't hear the word, or I didn't hear the character say that. I didn't see what was happening until it had happened.
So obviously there's a lot of the characters telling you the story, that kind of magical thing that's happening, but clearly there's a lot of craft to this as well. So on any given day, when you sit down to write, do you write till the story ends that day? Do you have page goals? Word count goals? And how do you keep the pacing and suspense throughout if it's just kind of coming to you? Michael, you want to take that first?
Sure. I do have a word count goal. I try to hit 1,500 every day. The one thing I like to do, though, I don't stop at 1,500. Sometimes it might be a 3,500 word day, and other times it feels like I've been crawling for 8 hours to just put in my time there and hit that. But I do, if things are going well, I like to stop sort of in mid-stride, because that makes it a little easier for me to come back and catch up with the same sense of suspense and rhythm that I had when I go back the next day. But I do think the word count doesn't matter to me so much as the act of reserving time and making sure that you're showing up every day at about the same time and you're blocking everything out. Then, it's not, the phone's not with me then, the Wi-Fi is not connected. It's just story brain, because I feel like the subconscious rewards that and punishes you for distraction. I see that far too frequently.
How about you, Sandra?
I think we were separated at birth, Michael, because I feel as you do. I think the discipline is so much of this. A vivid imagination, certainly, and some craftsmanship is taught or picked up over years and years of doing it. But I think the self-discipline of sitting down every day, and some days I don't lock myself in, McKenna, to word count or page count or anything like that. But some days I'll write 12 pages and it'll be, oh my gosh, that was such a great day. And then other days it's torture to write 2. And I can't explain why that happens. But it does. Very often. But even when it's not going well, I put the time in the chair, because I can always go back to pages I've written earlier and work on those and rewrite. But I think it's the discipline of knowing this is work time and I have to do this. If there's a shortcut to putting words on paper, I don't know what it is. And I think as long as I've been doing it, I would have discovered that way. So, and also, like Michael, I stop before I get to the end of the scene. I know what the end of the scene is going to be, and I may make myself some bullet points. But I think Hemingway did this. He kind of stopped in mid-sentence so that he would have some place to start the next day, because getting started is often the hardest thing. And then stopping is sometimes the hardest thing, because if you're on a roll, you feel like, I really need to capture this. No. So it has to be fluid, because life happens. I mean, life happens. And so it has to be a little bit fluid. And I used to punish myself a whole lot more than I do now for not putting in as many hours in the day. But by the same token, you have to dedicate yourself to doing it because it's too hard to do if you're not willing to sit down and devote that time to it.
I have to say, you saying that maybe you two were separated at birth, I on paper, this combination of the two of you, I was like, what are we going to talk about? But it's so funny how your process has just been like kismet. You just both have the same process. It's been a wonderful talk, at least for me to observe and listen to. I have a few more questions that are not specific to your most recent books, but a little more broad, and then we'll get to some audience questions. So, P.D. James once said that there were only 4 motives for murder: love, lust, loathing, or lucre. Is there a motive that you think you come back to more than other motives? And I'm going to put you on the spot, Koryta.
I would say I come back to the idea of vengeance or atonement more often than anything else. And I'm big on that idea of the sins of the fathers. You could probably grab half my books and point out some element of a family legacy, or at least the perception of the sins of the past to call on the present. Now, when I'm writing a supernatural book, that's baked in. It's one of the reasons I think I gravitate toward those. It's that Gothic sensibility that the past is very active and is shaping choices made in the present.
How about you, Sandra?
Well, if I'm thinking of my books, and I'm trying, and usually it's a vanity on the part of the bad guy. People, sociopaths who absolutely have no conscience and feel justified by what they do. So I'm not sure where that fits in with those 4 categories you gave us, but it would be like, I can do this just because I'm me. And so in that case, I think on the part of the protagonist, it's to expose somebody's just the vanity, the audacity they have to think the rules don't apply to them. Somebody smarter than I am who was interviewing me one time said, your books are very thematic. They're always about the abuse of power. And I said, really? I never thought of that, but I am brilliant, And so I said, yeah, you're kind of right. Whether it be a teacher, a preacher, a parent, a judge, a police officer, I think what really gets me going is the abuse of power in any category. And so my villains tend to be somebody who has taken advantage of that, and usually are very vain about it, the vanity of it. Yeah, I don't know where that fits in that narrow category, but P.D. James honed it down very well, which obviously I can't do.
No one that I have asked that question to has said any one of those 4. So you're right on track. We got sins of the fathers and abuse of power. Fine.
And we just described the rise and fall of most republics with that. We covered some.
It's true.
Or marriages, or any relationship.
True. That's really.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, this one's just a fun, superficial question. You sit down to write. Do you put on music? Do you have a favorite beverage? Do you have any little routine that you do on your writing days?
Well,
Sandra lead.
The first thing I do is I light candles. I have one right over there, which you can't see, but I light scented candles. I like my workspace to be orderly and neat, and I have something living. It's either a flower, an ivy, something living nearby. I don't write to music. Beverage of choice depends on the time of day. And y'all can make out of that what you want, but
Fair enough.
no, I tend to, I might start a happy hour a little early, but then I can't type. So I just, but no, I start with my French vanilla coffee and a scented candle and something living. I always have fresh flowers or a plant on my desk.
That sounds wonderful. What did you say, Koryta?
Well, I was going to say that I roll out of bed and have a nice mug of scotch, but we already touched on that. I'm very, I would say, superstitious, although it doesn't feel that way day to day. But I do have certain little objects kind of acquired along the way that I like to have in the space. I write to music, and I'm very superstitious about that. If the playlist is working, if the book is working, then I keep the same playlist on loop. And then when the book struggles, I blame the music, obviously. It's the only person it's the only thing I can point to. So I would say with regard to my physical space, things need to be a certain way, that routine.
Yeah. So we have a question from Joanne that's exactly on this topic. Do you have a physical space dedicated to writing only?
Yes.
Okay. So you've also talked quite a bit about craft and hard work and button share and all those things, but do you have one piece of advice that you always give to people who are like, I'm an aspiring writer? What's your advice? Michael?
Actually, I would say beyond the obvious, read widely. I don't know if enough aspiring writers are really reading about craft. And Sandra and I are big fans of craft books in general. And I would say that at any stage, but we talked about Vogler or Vogler. But I don't care whether it's Strunk and White level simple, or if you want to read something from a playwright about structure, anything to me that is an analysis of how to improve the craft is worth picking up. And it's also, for me, it's a refocusing. It's a reminder of everything what is exciting about the art of writing and the reason I wanted to do it to begin with. And so I guess that's maybe not the best question for an aspiring writer, because I think it's like, to me, that's an oil change. That should be regular maintenance, is refresh yourself on, what mattered originally, and are you honoring that? But I can't get down in the weeds enough when it comes to craft. I love it. Picking another writer's brains, reading interviews with writers. I mean, all of that is just grist for the mill.
How about you, Sandra?
Well, I think all of the above, what Michael said. I have certain articles that I've had for 30 years that would have appeared in the Writer or, Writer's Digest or something like that. That resonated with me, an article about suspense, and I read it every time I start to write a book, and I get the writer's journey down every time I start to write a book, and about halfway through it, I open it up. I say, does my book that I'm writing now have this element? Does it have that element? Have I covered, so that I don't get too far off the path of just the craftsmanship. But in terms of, it's a little bit more psychological answer in terms of what I would advise aspiring authors is to ask themselves, they obviously say they want to be a writer. You know what you want. My question would be, what are you willing to give up? And this may pertain more to my female colleagues than not, because in most households, and typically speaking, it's still this way, that the man can go to work every day and everything's, he comes home and everything is more or less taken care of, but a woman still largely, is responsible for the taking care of the house and taking care of the children on top of the writing. And when I started, I had two toddlers at home. So there were a lot of things, I never joined a women's club. Because I would work when I could. And so I think a lot of people, it's really sad, but say, are you willing to give up lunch with friends and Sunday afternoon football games and this? And there are going to be sacrifices you're going to have to make if you want to do it that badly. And if you don't want to do it that badly, you're not going to be successful at it.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting you mentioned that, particularly about women writers, because I've heard from several authors that I've had discussions with that when the pandemic started and they had children at home, despite being professional writers,
right,
their husbands who would normally go to work and who had work from home responsibilities said, well, I'm going to be in the office, 9 to 5. You're in charge of the kids. Like, that was the default, right? Even though the writer who is making money in a professional writing career, so those gender roles clearly are still prevalent. And it's fascinating that you would say that.
I hasten to say, though, that I had the best partner in the world. My husband from the get-go said, what can I do to help? And he's still that way to this day. We're still married after all these years. And our kids came out okay. They turned out great. But he was also a proponent, whatever it takes, I'll help. I'll do the best. But when push comes to shove, even if he were willing to help, it's still the woman who kind of steers the boat. It's still the woman who has to. He may have driven them to the dentist appointment, but I was the one who knew they had to go to the dentist and would make the appointment. And so it's a sharing thing. It really is. But I've had colleagues and even male colleagues in this time who say, I've got to get out of my bedroom. I've been in this room for a year and we've got 3 kids at home who have to be homeschooled, So I think this past year has been a totally new experience for everybody, but I can see where it would have an impact. Fortunately, my kids are gone. So I didn't have to worry about that, but yeah, it's still, it's a gender thing. Regardless of how far we've come.
Well, you and your husband clearly worked it out well, given your bio that I just read.
We did.
So we have a few questions about reading, but I have a 3-part reading question that I like to ask, and I will repeat any portion of it if you would like me to. So, who are some of your writing influences? Who are some of your favorite authors, and what have you read and loved recently? So, Koryta.
I'll think of read recently and loved first. There was a book called When We Were the Kennedys, which is a memoir by Monica Wood. And it's a memoir of this girl growing up in the 1960s in this little mill town in Maine. And I love the way, the whole story is beautiful, but I love the way she described the complex relationship she had with this mill that both provided for her family and ultimately poisoned and led to her father's death. And I love the nuanced approach she took with that. So that one really stands out.
What was the name again?
When We Were the Kennedys.
All right. All right. Favorite authors in general. Who do you not miss a book from?
Wow, that's gonna be a long list. People who were inspirational at the start and remain inspirations. I think of Michael Connolly, James Lee Burke, Dennis Lehane, Stephen King, Laura Lippman, Alistair Burke, and I'll try to stop somewhere below 10. With apologies, Stuart Onan, are you listening?
And who would you consider writing influences? I mean, there may be some crossover, but
yeah,
okay,
that same group. And then actually, Joe Hill, I would highlight. I think I'm the one person on the planet who did not know that Joe Hill was Stephen King's son. And I remember finding Heart-Shaped Box in a store, and just the cover attracted me. And I remember reading it, and I loved that book. But what really excited me about it was that here was someone who was not Stephen King writing like Stephen King. And so when I started So Cold the River, which was this big departure for me, and there were some people who were discouraging that and others who were encouraging. But I had Joe Hill, who to me was just this anonymous guy in my mind as proof that it could be done. And then I got the news that he was Stephen King's son, and I'm glad that there was the leg there, because that book really just stands out as a moment of influence.
That's fantastic. Okay, Sandra, same question. Writing influences, favorite authors, and what have you read and loved recently?
Well, my influences are older than your influences. I loved Taylor Caldwell, who wrote in the 60s, and she wrote under a male pseudonym because she thought it would help her get published. But she told these saga type, stories where just family strife and generations and Captains and the Kings and Testimony of Two Men, and those stories I read over and over because they were just so engrossing, and they were long, saga type books. Tennessee Williams, because he compressed his compression. He could compress so much into a 2.5-hour play that said more than just the words on the page, and yet he wrote poetically, and he had that Southern voice, that decadence that I just love, and so he was a big influence. And then there was an English author who wrote under Eve Stevens and Evelyn Anthony. And both of those were pseudonyms, but I devoured the Evelyn Anthony books when I started looking into romantic suspense, because she was amazing at it. And all of her books were just great. She started writing right after World War II. So she was writing mostly in the 50s and 60s in the Cold War. And her books were the sexual tension in them, because it was always a Nazi and a Nazi hunter, And so I've always said, if my heroine's a fireman, then the hero needs to be an arsonist. It has to be that impossibility to get together. And then Ken Follett, just storytelling, just absolute storytelling. And The Eye of the Needle, I thought, wow, this is great. You can mix sexuality with espionage. You can mix, the two. There can be a timeout for a relationship, even though this one is, of course, not a very healthy one, but for a relationship to build under the very worst of circumstances. So all of those writers influenced me. In terms of favorite authors, all the ones that Michael named, plus I have a lot of romance. My colleagues that started as I did in romance, and I still love their books. I read them all the time. And favorite book recently, one that I really enjoyed was about the one about Churchill that came out last summer. I think it was called
The Vial, Splendid in the Vial.
Splendid in the Vial.
Yeah.
Because I think Churchill was one of the most brilliant wordsmiths. If you read his papers, his speeches, I mean, the way he used words, and he worked at it. He worked at it very hard to get that speech just right, to get those writings just right. And liking or hating politically, he had a brilliant mind. But this book was set. Did you read it?
Yes,
yeah. It was during the Battle of Britain, and it wasn't just about the mechanics of it and everything. It was about he is a human being. It was very personal. It was all of his eccentricities and family relationships, and I just thought it was a fascinating book.
And the way he really did believe early on how he emotionally embodied this challenge, the country would learn to emotionally embody it in the same way. I thought that was fascinating. But the most important takeaway from that book, in my opinion, was that he woke up and had champagne.
Yeah.
So if there's one lesson to take from Winston, I think that is clearly the one.
Oh, every day would start out just a little bit easier.
Excellent. Okay, so we're going to move on to some audience questions here. And a couple of them are specific to Michael, and some of them are for Sandra, and we'll just pop back and forth. So, what was the inspiration for Those Who Wish Me Dead? One of Glenn's favorite books ever.
First of all, thank you. The inspiration was ultimately a backpacking trip that I took through the Beartooth Mountains with some friends, and it's such a beautiful place. It's such a unique part of the world. But once you get out there a little bit, you realize that all of the things that are really beautiful are also very threatening. And I love that it's what Sandra was just talking about. You have that impossible line of contrast, and the thing that can kill you could also keep you safe. And as I began to think about that with regard to forest fires, it really just, it seemed like the setting and that idea of someone who has been damaged by a fire needing to embrace a fire, which was inspired by the 1948 Man Gulch incident where 13 smoke jumpers were killed and one survived by literally laying down in the ashes of his own fire. That, I would say, I've got like 5 different things in the mix, but that's how I've come to ideas. Those things sort of swirl around each other, and all of a sudden I had a character in Hannah. And yeah, I loved writing that book, so thank you.
So Sandra, this is a long comment, so I'm not going to put it on the screen because it's going to cover your face. But let's see. So Kim was going to say that she loves how you can mix love and sex in your books without making it the main purpose for the book. She can always feel the heat between the characters without being distracted by lust, all caps. And she thanks you for that. I think the question in there is, has that just been an intentional thing for years? How do you build that romantic tension?
Well, I work very hard at it, but I go back to what I was saying about the eye of the needle, and it's hard to write romantic suspense, and many authors have said, how do you do it? How do you maintain it? To me, it's a natural, because each element ratchets the stakes of the other. It makes the other element that more intense. Never are we more afraid than when someone we care about is in peril. So that heightens the suspense. Not only is the protagonist concerned about their life, they're concerned about the life of the person they're coming to know about. And then never is sexuality more heightened than when it's almost imperative. It has to culminate now, or it may never. And you go back to, like, during war, when men and women, it's like, this may be the only time we have. We may have an hour, we may have a day, but it's right now. And so that heightens the sexual tension. So to me, it's very complementary, those two elements, the suspense, the building suspense, the stakes get higher there, the more they come to care for each other, and the sexuality builds, the tension builds, the more in peril they're placed. So they complement each other. But in terms of how to do it, it's tough. Because you want it to be realistic. Obviously, if they're running for the bad guy getting shot at, they're not going to, you have to kind of work it into the plot. But it's why I spend hours and hours and hours rewriting. Writing the sex scene the first time, it takes a lot of work. But it's the rewriting it 10 times to get all of that emotional tug in there. It's more than just, it's more what's going on in their heart and their mind as it is with what's going on with their bodies.
Got it. Thank you. Yeah, no, it absolutely makes sense. It absolutely makes sense. And I'm sure that that's what keeps it from feeling gratuitous as well, which is, I think, what her comment is. Like, you don't just pop sex scenes in your books for no reason.
No.
They're character driven and plot driven, and you feel that there's a reason that they're happening. So back to Michael for a second. How long did you have the idea for Never Far Away before starting to write it? And what was your inspiration on this one?
I should be able to come up with that answer quicker. I had been thinking about Leah for probably 5 years, but I didn't have anything beyond that idea of someone who had to leave her children and then is going to be reunited, but without any clarity of identity. You know, when she sees her children again, she will know, but they will not. So I feel like about 5 years on that. And then it was last winter and summer in Maine. Just walking the dog is my great idea generator. I think the dog is really the brains in the family.
Fair enough. Okay. A quick question from Sally. Is there a Scott Carson in the pod line?
Hello, Sally. Miss seeing you in person. And Scott Carson he rides again in October with a book called Where They Wait, which I am revising a little bit behind deadline while we speak.
And since you mentioned that, Sandra, you have a book coming out in August, right?
Yes.
You want to tell us about that one really quickly?
It's called Blind Tiger, which is another word for a speakeasy. I'm taking a total departure. It's set in 1920 during Prohibition. Prohibition had just been put into law. And the only people excited about that were the prohibitionists and the bootleggers and the moonshiners. And so last year, about this time when I was thinking about the next book, 2020, we were so steeped in all of the bad things that were happening and we were under quarantine. And I thought, gosh, my head's about to explode with all this. How do you write something like this with people wearing masks over their face? And I thought, what if I just went back and what happened 100 years ago? And I started doing research on 1920, and we had men coming home from World War I, with PTSD. Nobody knew what that was. We had a global pandemic of Spanish flu. Women had just gotten the vote, so there was this huge women's movement, and then you couldn't even get a drink. So come to find out, things weren't all that different, but I'm having a blast writing it. It's fun not to write without cell phones to mess up a good scene, or security cameras, or any of the things that we have to think about now. No technology that, is messing up the suspense. So it's been fun.
Where is it set?
It's set in Texas, and little did I know, but I live 50 miles from a small town that I've known of all my life. But what I didn't know was it was the moonshine capital of Texas.
That's amazing.
Yeah, it's been great. I mean, they had, blind tigers and whorehouses, and it was a pretty wild place. So, yeah, it's been fun to do the research. I know how to make moonshine. I don't recommend it.
Well, I can't wait to talk to you again in August for that book, because that's going to be excellent.
It's got a great cover. It's got a great cover. It's on my
earlier.
It's on my Facebook page. Yeah, you can see it there.
Yep. So I'm probably going to do one or two more questions. Let's see here. We've got, how do you know when the book is finished? Not the story, but the crafting. Sandra.
Me?
Yes.
I don't think it's ever finished. I would keep writing and rewriting, and I don't like to turn it in until I'm as confident as I can possibly be that it's as good as I can make it. And I hand in as clean a manuscript. I don't leave it up to anybody to do my work for me. I do every period, every comma, everything to the best of my ability. And I think if I went through Thickest Thieves today, I would still want to rewrite, sentences along the way. So I never feel like it's finished. And my editor would appreciate my turning my manuscripts in a lot sooner than I do. But I keep working on them, keep working on them, keep working on them. Yeah.
How about you, Koryta?
Could not agree more. And in fact, it's interesting you mention when the book comes out, I read from printed pages, because if I'm holding the physical book, it drives me nuts. I want to make changes. So I prefer to print out pages that I'm going to read from, and then I still can. So it's never finished. You could write the same book over and over and over for an entire career. I think it's a tough way to make a living, but
okay, and then the last one. I'm sorry for the questions we didn't get to, but we have kind of run out of time. How do you pick the locations and scenes for your stories?
I think sometimes the story picks the location. And the book on moonshining that's coming out, Blind Tiger, I read it. I came across about this raid that had taken place in this little baby town that I lived close to, and I thought, what in the world is going on there? And that's how I found out. And so I thought, well, that would be a good place to kind of set the book. I'm giving it a different name because there are still relatives of people involved in that live there. Yeah, that is, so the setting kind of chose that book, not the other way around. But I always write places I'm familiar with, the Carolinas, Texas, Louisiana, and the Deep South, because that's what I know.
Michael?
For me, settings are usually the starting point. And they find you. But I'm always looking for that little sort of backwoods place with the weird mythology or weird folklore, or just that historical moment that isn't common knowledge. And I tend to latch onto that. I mean, an example would be The Ridge, which is set around a big cat rescue center that is in the middle of nowhere. That's based on a place that really exists. The Beartooth Mountains, With Those Who Wish Me Dead, Never Far Away is set in Maine, in areas that I know. But it's one of the reasons that I think I, again, struggle with a series approach is I like to be out and about. I think it's the old journalist instinct is, let's try a different story in a different place every day. So I'll keep moving them around.
Wherever it is, the setting should be another character of the book. And it's an important character of the book. The mood has to, match the story. And I like to do like these little microcosmic towns or places where those characters and you did this beautifully in Never Far Away, because those people were the only people in the earth, in that situation, on that remote place. And I like to create a sense of remoteness and isolation in every book, that this is the orbit. This is the rest of the world is not involved in this.
Right. Yep.
All right. So I think that's going to wrap up our conversation for today. I will say this is a perfect segue to, if you missed the beginning of this talk, some of you have asked questions that we've actually already talked about, so I didn't pull those back up. But excuse me, if you missed the beginning, give it about an hour or two on YouTube for it to process, and you can watch this talk from the beginning, and it should be ready on Facebook, available from the beginning as soon as I hit end broadcast here. So if I didn't get to your question, it's probably already been talked about. Thank you both so much. This has been an absolute delight. Thank you, Sandra. Your book is out now, Thickest, Thieves, and in paperback next month. And then Michael, Koryta's brand new book, Never Far Away, comes out Tuesday. And as always, we have copies in stock. We'd love it if you're enjoying these events, if you'd consider ordering the books from us or ordering something else from us. We go to a lot of effort to put these on, and it is always fun. But if we're going to keep putting them on, then maybe get something from us. Anyway, on that note, Thank you again. Thanks for watching. Oh my God, my dog just got home from the groomer and is attacking me. It's time to go. Thank you. Bye.
Bye, Michael. Bye,
Thank you, Sandra.
Good to see you.
Good to see you.